All right. What's good, y'all? This is the Pan African Evolution. It's the first episode. So yeah, I'm gonna try not to say so much, but yeah, this is the podcast. I'm gonna be running it with y'all, talking about uh, just the African American experience and really us as African descended people, not just Americans, but African Americans as part of a larger global diaspora of African descendants. Not just about, obviously our history coming from Africa is part of that, but also how we've had to evolve and adapt into different cultures and different societal norms around the world just to survive, just to be able to make it to this point. A lot of our ancestors that took that boat ride, a lot of them never lived to make it off the ship. And even the ones that did didn't survive the New World. A very small percentage of the people that were taken from West Africa were able to actually survive the trip and survive the experience of being in a new environment, let alone have children evolve to the point where we're at now in the different realities that we live in as Black people and as descendants of Africa. Throughout that process, a lot of us stopped claiming Africa and stopped claiming African proximity. So I'm not a real big fan of that, but even that has some nuance and deserves a lot of detailed conversation about why that is. We have to approach this situation like a surgeon and not sloppily where we're pushing our people away by trying to push too hard for a result that we want. And that's unity. Unity doesn't require conformity. So a lot of times we're thinking that we're all going to have to adopt like the same spiritual beliefs, the same lifestyles, the same ways of living just to respect each other and to be able to unify. And I think that's a bogus concept. I don't believe unity requires conformity in every circumstance. I do think we need to have some realistic discussions at some point about what position we take on certain things in the world. When we're talking about geopolitics, how entire nations are being colonized and treated by major superpowers, and at times those same superpowers will come and do deals with other people of color, other marginalized groups, and try to play one protected group of people against another. That's something that we got to break down, and that's something that we have to be able to overcome if we're going to step up to imperialism and white supremacy on a global, white supremacy on a global level, right? That's the type of things I'm gonna be talking about with the podcast that I'm developing. And of course, there may be other spinoffs. There's some other conversations that can be had, but I want to take a slow, set of approach to unpacking our history and the history of imperialism and marginalization as a whole, right? Because we've been through so much more than we realize that we've been through as a group of people. And we really have to unpack that. We really have to heal from that. We have to start that process of healing. But healing always starts with the truth. So it's really hard for us to heal from something that we've never been properly educated on. And the first thing I really want to smash and really put to bed is this idea that the different African descendants, the different groups of Black people, that we all had our own individual struggles, so much so that, what happened to people of African descent in Haiti or in the Dominican or Puerto Rico was somehow not related to or had nothing to do with what Black people in Louisiana or Alabama or Florida were going through. Nothing is further from the truth. There's an intertwined history that happens when you take your time and you go through the real history and you unpack. You start realizing we got a lot of cousins. You know what I mean? And that's really the power of Pan Africanism. Pan Africanism really started in the middle of slavery and colonialism as different groups of people that were marginalized standing up against the empire, right? So you can almost think of Black people like the Star Wars movie, all these different people from different planets coming together to stand up against the evil empire. That's that's what Pan Africanism was. That's what Pan Africanism is. But I do think that some of us, as we've assimilated with various nations that we once used to stand up against, that we once used to rebel and revolt against, as we became citizens of those nations and started to do business deals, they started to pacify our movements. One of the first things they did was to divide and conquer and separate people of African descendants, the descendants of African slaves throughout the Americas and around the world. First thing they did was start dividing us, like dividing our history, revising our history, not letting one group of African descendants know about another group and how we came together to fight back against, colonial powers. I'll name them. The Spanish pulled up in the Americas first in 1492. The Portuguese had a lot to do with the way race is defined in the Americas, and the way chattel slavery was devised. They had a lot to do with that. They used the German race science of eugenics and implemented that within a system called Blancomiento, right? So there's that part. But then you got the French Code Noir, the Black Codes in the Louisiana Territory, which took up almost like a third or more of the United States itself, right? We need to know about Code Noir and the Black Codes. We need to know about racial hierarchies. That's something that's very distinct in different colonies that slaves were kept in. The French had a set of slave laws. The Spanish and Portuguese had their own sets of slave laws. And the British had their own sets of slave laws. And the way that they approached slavery was similar but slightly nuanced. The ways that people could come out of slavery, similar but slightly nuanced. Those nuances matter. And the reality that a lot of French, Spanish, and Portuguese slavery included racial hierarchies as well as slave owners impregnating the slaves, right? Women that they owned, and the children of those slave owners being put into a separate race class from, their black peers. And even in the case of indigenous people, the same thing. Indigenous people fathered by a white man or even a white woman, but typically a white man, they were considered to be a separate race from the rest of the indigenous people. And that's how they started to create racial hierarchies and racial class systems that valued a closer proximity to white people. That's deep. Some people may wonder why that's important, but when you're talking to people of color and some of them seem like they understand white supremacy and like they're ally and they down with opposing racism and things like that. But then you meet other people of color and it seems like they got the same mind as a white person. Sometimes these are white people kids that just look like people of color. And race itself is based on German eugenics. It's not a real science. It's not a genetically based concept. It's based on government class systems alone. Nothing else. There's nothing scientific about the construct of race whatsoever. And so you can't separate race from politics. You can't separate politics from race because race was created in America out of politics. In every other nation that has its own variants of race, that's a geopolitical system where they are playing off of American hegemony, European dominance and influence, and they're basically trying to take their place within the American European empire. The countries that are adopting similar race constructs, and because it's not something that has been built into their society as long, it's not as pervasive as American race. And what a lot of countries don't understand is that there's the race dynamic they create within their own country, and then there's the racial dynamic that America and European powers have over the entire world. There are entire countries of people that are treated like an African American group or like a Latino group or like an Asian group. You have entire countries that are treated the way that their minority counterparts within the United States are treated. And when your entire country is being treated a particular way, but the only people you experience and interact with every day are people like you from your own ethnic background and experience, it's very easy to become confused and assume that every atrocity that you suffer, every issue you encounter, is somehow being inflicted by your own people, when in fact your people are being controlled by another group of people in an entirely separate country. That's geopolitics. It gets tricky. We got to understand all of that. I don't think African Americans get nearly enough factual, credible, concrete information about geopolitics, how this thing actually works. I know we don't, because if African Americans understood it, we'd be voting in higher numbers. Because geopolitical policy in the United States is determined by the Congress. Congress is something that we vote for. And you don't just vote for congressmen, you have to talk to them on the regular, write them letters, call them, blow them up. You got to make sure that you stay in your congressman face. Our House representatives, they get elected every 2 years. So there's no way that you're not talking to Congress people on the regular and you're impacting geopolitical situations, right? So it's no way to be Pan-Africanist and be like anti-political or on the fence about being involved and engaged in politics. The only way for you to support Mother Africa is either move there, and I'm not one that's big on pushing everybody towards repatriation, or moving back to Africa. You don't have to move back to Africa to support Africa. You do have to buy African. You do have to reconnect with African, learn the African history. But moving back to Africa is not the only way to support. We gotta we gotta set up like a international collective, like an economic cooperation, where we're buying our products, our materials, our goods and services, our food, our soaps, everything from countries within the mother continent, right? But if we're not there, in order to do what I'm talking about, there's got to be some government incentive that comes in at some point. If we're doing all this exporting and maybe even importing and exporting with another country outside of the countries we live in that are run by white people, they're going to step in with their taxes. They're going to step in with their import and export duties. There's a lot of things that governments can do to make their situation hard. That's why it doesn't exist at the level that we want it to exist at now. There's no way to leave the political part out of that. I'll explain why that is, and we'll get to talk a lot more about that in the next coming episodes. This is just kind of pregame episode for me to test the equipment, test the software, and see what we got going on. So I'm gonna be doing this thing pretty regularly. I'm on TikTok live streaming as well. Y'all can go on my homepage. Y'all look, you can see my I'm sorry, y'all. I'm gonna try to be a lot better spoken next time. Y'all can go look at uh my TikTok page and follow me on there, and other social medias on Twitter, Afro Meech, and check me out on there. Follow my website. You can go to my link tree. I think it's in my description in my bio also, and that'll have my website on there. My website is meechus.com, meechus.com. Let me know if y'all got critique, criticism. Check me out on Apple Music, Beats by Meech, right? Go check all that out. Let me know what y'all think. Give me y'all honest feedback and critique, what y'all like to see, what y'all not like to see. I got a podcast coming up with some millennials and Gen Z talking about civic literacy and civic engagement on Juneteenth, next Wednesday, to kick off Juneteenth, with Gary Chambers. Me and Gary Chambers and some other notable African Americans from my community in North Louisiana and throughout the state of Louisiana. We're going to be talking some real stuff about African Americans and civic empowerment, and that's going to tie back to what I'm talking about with Pan-African evolution and our need to be involved in politics in order to affect geopolitics and grow the African diaspora. We're going to have to develop some geopolitical intelligence about that. That's going to require local civic action as well, just like our brothers and sisters down in South Africa. Shout out to South Africa and all the big things they doing down there. Shout out to Niger or Niger. Shout out to Mali. Shout out to all the diaspora, Ghana, offering dual citizenship to African Americans. Kenya, you know, getting rid of the whole situation where you got to have a visa or a passport or whatever. Like we're gonna talk about a lot though. I'm gonna get out here and quit running my mouth. I got a little bit of a sugar rush. I had me a real good sweet tart slushy. So I'm gonna hop off and I'll talk to y'all soon. I'm gonna like doing this. Thank y'all so much for tuning in.